we want to have a conversation on the status and the future of nuclear energy in Kenya. And we are aware that Kenya has been exploring the potential of nuclear energy as part of as part of a long-term strategy to stabilize and just ensure that we are having stable, reliable, and low carbon power supply. So of course, this comes at a time where we are seeing an increase we are having increasing energy demands due to industrialization, urbanization, and of course, economic growth. And then so the nuclear conversation comes in because nuclear power presents a viable solution for baseload electronic generation. So as we as a country seek to diversify into our energy mix, and possibly achieve a sustainable industrial growth, nuclear energy has, in a way, emerged as a potential solution to meet our country's rising electricity demand. So the government established the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority and then Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, who are our guests this morning and our speakers this morning, in its steps and its attempts to explore the feasibility of nuclear energy as part of its long-term energy strategy. But now, as these two agencies are introduced and established, there comes a few concerns about nuclear energy in this country. The first one is a safety concern. And in the recent past, we have seen protests over the selection of the Uyombo energy plant based in Kilifi County as a site. So of course, the community in that area is raising issues around their potential displacement. Of course, they're worried that they're going to lose their place, their lands and all that. And then, of course, there's the impact on the marine ecosystems. How is the energy that is going to be generated going to interfere with their marine ecosystem? And we know why marine ecosystem is very important for those in the coast. And then, of course, we have just the general safety concerns over the potential radiation exposure to the human body and just to their livestock and such things. So beyond those concerns that we have seen, we also have the general public just having concerns on the cost of nuclear energy adoption for this country. The regulatory framework also is not very clear, and there's some clarity that is being sought as well around it. And then, of course, just the general public acceptance through public participation, it also remains a key point for discussion. So again, as we're having this conversation, we have to be alert to the fact that beyond the safety and regulatory and acceptance concerns that we are having as a country and as citizens in this country as far as nuclear energy is concerned, we are also aware that a decision was made to dissolve NUPEA and integrate it into the Ministry of Energy. This, of course, throws us off balance and leaves us at a limbo, because then it raises concerns on the timelines that the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency have had together with the other agencies, because we know that there was an intention to commission a power plant which was intended for 2023. The groundbreak for 2034. The groundbreaking for the power plant was intended for 2027. That's like 2 years away. But the big question now is, with the government, with the changes being made with the dissolution, is the government still on course with the project, especially because of the long regulatory and binding and bidding processes that we all know has to happen? And then, of course, being aware that for you to construct, and engineer will be speaking to us probably about that as well, for you to be able to construct a power plant, it takes about 7 to 10 years. So where does that leave us as a country with our dream of being of having nuclear energy integrated into our energy mix. And then we also know that, for example, in Africa, we have countries that have nuclear power programs. And we have South Africa, for example, and it operates a power station. As much as and the power station operated in South Africa, I cannot pronounce I think it's Kyoback, but yeah. So the power plant that is operated, or the power station operated in South Africa, is the only commercial nuclear plant in Africa. And then, of course, despite it being the only nuclear plant in commercial nuclear plant in Africa, it's facing challenges of maintenance, and of course, it has aging infrastructure. But despite all that, it still remains a key power source. And then when we look at our neighbors in Egypt as well, we know that they are currently constructing, and an engineer might correct me if it's complete or not, but they are working on constructing the El Daba nuclear plant. And the plant being constructed in Egypt has a capacity of about 4,800 megawatts. And that is being done in partnership with a Russian company called the Rosatom. So we can see that in Africa, there is progress being made towards incorporating and integrating nuclear energy into our energy mix. And so there's this new era for African nuclear energy expansion. So as we are having this conversation, it's very clear and very evident that the successful integration of nuclear energy into our energy mix as a country requires us to address a few issues around regulations, the technicality, the social aspects, and the environmental concerns that have been raised by our citizenry. Rightly so. It's a new thing. It's being adopted. We are concerned. We have issues, and we need to have this conversation. So this morning, we're very privileged to have Engineer Ohaga, who is from the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. And the agency, in a nutshell, was established to spearhead Kenya's nuclear energy development program, and has played a critical role and a central role in planning, doing trainings, capacity building, and doing stakeholder engagement to ensure that as a country we become energy stable, and nuclear power being a viable part of Kenya's energy mix. So this morning, Engineer Ohaga is going to speak to us about the role of nuclear energy in achieving Kenya's energy policy goals. And as we think through the unpacking that I've done, he's going to speak to us about the status of nuclear energy in our country. Where are we as far as that is concerned, and what progress we have made this far? And of course, as you're speaking about the progress made this far, we will also be speaking to the challenges and the opportunities that nuclear power presents, and also the challenges and opportunities that are there in nuclear power development. And then, of course, the big question, which we are the Institute of Economic Affairs. So if you're not speaking financing, then we are not getting it right. So this morning, again, he's going to try to talk to us about the available financing options for nuclear energy development in our country. So as engineer is coming in to speak to us about those issues that we have raised, we would want to just do a bit of housekeeping and remind us. You are on mute all through, but as we will be having this conversation, please feel free to use your chat box and just type in as your questions are coming through, so that you will not miss a question during the Q&A session. And you can just engage us and raise your questions at that point. And so, Engineer, we welcome you, Karibu Sana, as you speak to us about the status and future of nuclear energy in Kenya. You have 15 to 20 minutes to make your presentations, after which now we will have an engagement with our dear listeners as they raise their questions and concerns, and also give their insights on the topic. So, Engineer, you have 15 to 20 minutes. Karibu Sana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and thank you, members, for according us this opportunity to just give you a brief on the activities that Kenya has been undertaking since 2010 in regards to development of the nuclear power program. I want to bring to your attention that this program started in 2010, and as a result of the National Economic Council, this was the think tank of the then President Kibaki's government that looked at how Kenya was envisaged to develop and improving the lives of the Kenyan people, looking at the Vision 2030 and the pillars that anchored that Vision 2030 on the political, the economic, and the social pillars. Of course, Kenya envisaged that would have a double digit in terms of economic growth, and that in terms of the social pillar will have a just society. And in terms of politics, that our political arena would be led by issue-based. By looking at all these pillars, there exists what we call the enablers. What is it that is going to enable us to achieve this quality life for our people? And energy is an enabler to these pillars. And then what type of energy are we talking about that will enable this country to achieve its Vision 2030 and beyond? And these people introduced the idea of nuclear energy. And looking at countries globally, regionally, and even nationally, of the countries that have developed, or countries that we call the superpower, there are countries that have made it because of stability, because of reliability, because of affordability, and more so because of climate-friendly source of energy. And therefore, nuclear energy was mooted in 2010, and it has undergone through evolution until to date, from a committee within the Ministry of Energy in 2010. A board was formed in 2012 through a presidential directive that formed the Kenya Nuclear Electricity Board. And then in 2019, an act of parliament was enacted, we call the Energy Act of 2019, that did establish the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. So that is the journey that we have undertaken. So Kenya, over the last 10 years, has been following the International Atomic Energy Agency milestone approach. This is the international UN body that governs all nuclear power programs globally. And therefore it guides embarking countries like Kenya on what steps require to be done or be undertaken for you to effectively, sustainably, safely, and securely deploy nuclear power program. So they call it the milestone approach. And these milestones, you are evaluated based on phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And once you achieve those phases, then you are achieving certain milestones. So from 2010 to 2015, we undertook a pre-feasibility study just to check what are the infrastructure that requires to be developed for us to be able to make progress in regards to development of the nuclear power program. So using the milestone approach, we have 19 infrastructure elements that every country requires to develop for you to be evaluated by the International Atomic Energy Agency to check your level of preparedness in that particular regard. So that was done. A pre-feasibility study was undertaken, and from 2015, we invited the International Atomic Energy Agency to come and check our level of preparedness. So these 19 infrastructure issues include, first of all, is the national position. This is the commitment of the leaders towards the nuclear power program. The second one is on the management. How do you intend to manage the nuclear power program? And therefore, there are certain organizations that must be formed. The first one is the NEPIO, which is the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. as formed by the Energy Act of 2019. The other one is the regulator, very critical in the nuclear arena, because they're the ones supposed to develop regulatory framework and also the regulations that are supposed to drive the nuclear agenda. Public involvement or engagement is one of the infrastructure issues that you have to demonstrate that as a country you are involving, you are educating, you are disseminating information to the larger population so that they are aware of what the nuclear power program is all about. Another aspect which is critical is safety, and I'm really happy that you talked about safety concern. No nuclear power program will be undertaken by any vendor country if you cannot demonstrate that you are taking in consideration safety, safeguards, and security of the nuclear power program. And we call them the 3 S's. Any design must be subjected to those 3 S's. And it follows defense in depth, 5 layers, just to check that every country has demonstrated safety aspect of nuclear, security aspect of any nuclear material, and safeguarding any nuclear material that is in the country. The other item that is looked at is siting, basically is the location of a nuclear power plant. That is the 7th infrastructure issue. How do you locate a nuclear power program? The other one is industrial involvement. Basically, how do you localize this industry? Because as you start, you do not have the local manpower, then and also the industries. How do you bring them on board? How do you capacity build them so that after a period of time, they're able to start to participate in the affairs of the nuclear power program? The other one is radioactive management. This is also another issue that people and the population always ask, how do you manage your radio waste management in a nuclear power program? So a country has to demonstrate how you are going to manage your radio waste management. And then it is checked that you are putting strategies, plans, and policies to be able to undertake that. The other one is environmental protection. And that one is also an issue that you raised. This is one thing that you have to demonstrate how nuclear power program is going to interact with the environment, to the people, and with the property, and that it has no or minimum effect on that. And if there are any effect, then you must provide mitigation measures to ensure that everything else is okay. The other one is on procurement of a nuclear power program. We know it is a very complex program. So how would you bring in the long-term lead equipment? Are your laws aligned to how the nuclear power program or project can be procured? So you must demonstrate that. Legal framework. Have you established a legal framework within your country to be able to undertake or guide the implementation of the nuclear program? The other one is regulatory framework. Do you have regulations already established to run with the nuclear power program? So these 19 infrastructure issues is what the International Atomic Energy Agency then evaluates you against each one of them and show the progress that you have made. So we have come a long way for these 10 years that we have been in existence. We have been able to undertake various studies. The first one was the 15-year comprehensive plan for the nuclear power program. This one shows what you require to do because it's a long-term project. A nuclear power program has a lifespan of 80 years, and you can extend that lifespan by a further 20 years. That means you have a century with a nuclear power program. It's larger than a marriage, we say. So once you get into that marriage, you must be sure of the marriage. And that's why you say that safety is critical in a nuclear industry. So we have also undertaken national grid study. This was done in 2016, just to be able to be sure that our national grid will be able to evacuate the 1,000 megawatts that we are looking at. And if there are any bottlenecks within our national grid, what are the proposals for upgrade? And that was done, and the proposals have already been submitted to the KETRACO for purposes of ensuring upgrades are done. Reactor technology assessment is another study. What is the technology that you are looking into bringing into the country? The evolution of nuclear technology started with generation 1. Now we are on generation 3+, the modest, the state-of-the-art nuclear power project or nuclear power plant that we have currently that has enhanced safety features. We have also undertaken site evaluation of the location of a nuclear power program. We started with 29 sites within the country. Of course, nuclear power requires a lot of water for cooling because of the kind of energy that is generated within the nuclear power program. So one of the first criteria that must be located within the proximity of a cooling body. And therefore we went around the country, Lake Victoria, Lake Turkana, Indian Ocean, and evaluated 29 sites, and then ranked these sites based on the International Atomic Energy Agency guidelines that then gives you 5 guidelines on how to evaluate and rank these sites. Sites that are within the proximity of earthquake or seismic action, sites that are within the proximity of any volcanic action, even projected to happen or has never happened, but it is foreseen it can happen in 1,000 years, you exclude those areas. And that's how the areas, many areas within the Lake Turkana region and some areas within the Lake Victoria region were excluded using that exclusion criteria because of the safety aspects. You can see we are talking about safety in 1,000 years. It has never happened, but we project that it might happen, even with the probability of 0⁻⁷ chance of happening. But you exclude that particular site because in the event of it happening, then the repercussion can be dire. We have also undertaken a strategic environmental and social assessment. This is SESA, looking at the program level of the impact of nuclear at the program level, not in the project level. From 2012, we have been training engineers and scientists out of country at master's level in nuclear engineering. So far, we have trained 66 people in South Korea, where we have MOU with them at masters in master's engineering and also energy policy within the Seoul National University in South Korea. We also have MOUs with China. Last year was our first admission. We had 7 people training there again in nuclear engineering and management. We anticipate to project this one over the next 10 years because for a nuclear power program of the magnitude of 1,000 megawatts, you require about 1,000 people to work in that nuclear power program. We are also in a very advanced stages with the construction of the KONZA, Kenya Institute of Advanced Technology, based in KONZA. This university is going to be commissioned next year, and it will be training locally nuclear engineers and nuclear scientists. This is going to assist us more in advancing the numbers, graduating the numbers that are required for commissioning of the nuclear power program. So Kenya has included nuclear in its energy mix. In our energy policy 2018-2025, nuclear energy has been included in that policy, and energy sector is governed by energy master plan that we call the least cost power development plan. The current least cost power development plan is 2024-2043. It's a 20-year projection. And in that particular plan, Kenya has planned to commission its first nuclear power plant in the year 2034. So in the next 10 years, we expect to commission the first nuclear power plant. And we are on course with this because we anticipate that once we bring on board the owner operator who will be in charge of the operation and the maintenance and also the ownership of the nuclear power program, the owner operator will be able to invite bids, and then the successful bidder would be able to start construction of the nuclear power program so that by the year 2034, we have the first nuclear power program coming on board. I also want to bring to your attention that we have very advanced technologies. Initially, we used to have only large nuclear power plants. But over the last 15 years, there have been a lot of research and done in terms of the small modular reactors. And we are going to have our first ever small modular reactor being commissioned in the year 2029 in Romania. These are very highly designed nuclear power programs that meets the needs of countries, the smaller grids like Kenya, and in many African countries where the grids are small. These are modular in shape, and they can follow demand. They are scalable. As your demand increases, you are able to modularize them and increase the production to meet your demand, as it were. And Kenya is steadily following this development. And in our reactor technology assessment, we have done both for the large nuclear reactor and also for these small modular reactors, which will be so important for our grid in this particular regard. So members, in terms of regulation and regulatory framework, which is very critical, and there exists a body called the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority that is charged with the responsibility of developing the legal framework and the regulatory framework. And there are 19 regulations that are right now under review by this body, the regulator, and these regulations will be critical in the implementation of the nuclear power program, in the siting aspects, because you require permits to start the groundbreaking. You require electrical grid and also siting regulations, and also emergency planning regulations that are also being developed by the regulator, so that by the time the construction starts, then we should be able to have everything in place to make good progress. So some of these people that have been trained, the 66 have been trained in the country, some of them are now in the regulator developing these regulations. Some of them are within the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, and some of them exist within the 7 utilities of the energy sector, the KenGen, the Kenya Power, the KETRACO, EPRA, GDC, REREC. So that is how we train people. We get people already working in institutions, train them, and the spine over there ready to go when the nuclear power program is eventually commissioned. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we have engaged with the preferred site, which is the Kilifi site, and we also have our alternative site, which is a Kwale site, and we have our third site, which is along the Lake Victoria region. And in the way you do it, you start with the preferred site, you go to the alternative site, because you require to undertake further engineering studies on this site. So if the preferred site turns negative in terms of those feasibility studies, then you move to the alternative site. If it turns negative, then you go to the third site. But if you get positive results on the preferred site, then you continue with the groundbreaking on the preferred site to commission the nuclear power program. So this engagement with the public is a continuous process. It starts before construction of the nuclear power program. It continues during construction. It also continues during operation and maintenance, and also during the decommissioning of the nuclear power program. So this is an activity that has been ongoing. We shall continue to engage with the people within these 3 sites of Kilifi, Kwale, and the Lake Victoria region, where we have 1 site in regards to the construction of the nuclear power program. In terms of opportunities, members, the reason why nuclear power program was brought on board in terms of the energy mix, first is because this is the only source of energy globally that can operate for 2 years without an interruption. No wonder we have these countries developing very fast. If we want to talk about reliability, then the answer is in the nuclear power. If you want to talk about climate resilient source of energy, then it is in the nuclear power. If you look at the global outlook, nuclear energy has eliminated 60 metric tons of CO2 from the grid because of the 132 nuclear power programs that are operating globally. If you were to decommission all those nuclear power programs, then you'll be introducing 60 million metric tons of CO2 into the environment. You can imagine the kind of devastating impact we'll be having in that. Kenya has, in its Least Cost Power Development Plan, has always done studies on the role of nuclear power in decarbonizing our energy mix. And that's the reason why by the year 2034, Kenyan grid is expected to be 100% clean source of energy. The 7% that we have currently that is being generated from the fossil fuel is expected to be replaced by the nuclear energy. That means by the year 2034, the whole grid, wherever you connect, will be 100% clean energy. And that means, therefore, that will be contributing towards the Paris Accord in regards to the reduction of global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Members, we have the energy policy, which has certain goals, and the goals are to achieve reliability, to achieve stability, achieve security of supply and diversification, to achieve 100% clean energy. Affordability of electricity is a critical aspect of our Kenyan people, and of course, to spur economic growth and achieve energy efficiency. Now, these energy policy goals, the answer to all these energy policy goals of the Kenyan energy policy is being provided by the nuclear energy. I can attest to you that in terms of reliability, the answer is in nuclear power. In terms of clean and source of energy, which does not have any CO2 emission, is in the nuclear power. In terms of spurring economic growth, if you look at any country in the world that we'll call a superpower in terms of development, you will find in the energy mix there exists a nuclear power plant. And I'm happy that you noted that in Africa here, if you are asked to state which country is developed in Africa, you'll go to South Africa, and it's there because of that source of energy called nuclear energy, that they have two plants that have been operating from 1982. And it's continued to operate. In fact, nuclear power plants are designed with a lifespan. So I just wanted to ensure and say that the Quebec power plant in South Africa, which is located within the Quebec Marine Park or National Park, has been in operation for over 40 years. In its design life, it was supposed to operate for 40 years and then you decommission it. But there is always an option of life extension by undertaking further engineering analysis, further engineering upgrades to the plant, and then you are allowed by the regulator to extend the life of a nuclear power plant. So for Quebec of South Africa, the life extension has been granted, and it will be operating for a further 20 years to be able to spur development in that country. I also want to bring to your attention that South Africa is planning to bring 4 additional nuclear power plants, VVR, 1,200 times 4. That means 4,800 megawatt coming on board from Russia, Rosatom, by the year 2034. So they have already sent out their request for proposal for countries to provide additional nuclear power program. In Africa, again, as you rightfully put it, if you look at the north, and the second most developed country is Egypt, and in El Daba, another 4 nuclear power plants are being constructed, and it's envisaged that by the year 2029, all the 4 nuclear power plants will have been commissioned, and they will be injecting 4,800 megawatts into the grid of the Egyptian Kenyan people. So you can see the kind of opportunities in economic spurring growth, job creation, as we say. One nuclear power plant generating 1,000 megawatts will be able to employ 1,000 people directly working in that nuclear power plant. But indirectly, they will be able to provide 10,000 jobs. These are in the suppliers, in the design, in all the aspects during construction of that nuclear power plant. So you expect about 1,000 people to benefit indirectly from job creation as a result of nuclear power plant. Reliability of the grid, I cannot overemphasize this. For any nuclear power plant to be commissioned in any country, you must upgrade your grid. That grid must be sufficiently enabled to have highest reliability of 100% operation, so that there are no trips, there are no interruptions. You must be able to operate for 2 years without a flicker in that environment. And therefore, KETRACO is working on improving the national grid so that it is ready to evacuate power. Of course, in terms of climate change, as we have said, with the inclusion of nuclear power in our national grid, by the year 2034, we shall have no CO2 emission coming from our energy mix, because it will be 100% in terms of generation. In terms of non-electrical application, other than electric power generation, nuclear plant also provide some other non-electric application. You may be aware that cancer treatment utilizes nuclear components for diagnostics and also for treatment of cancer. So there is application of nuclear technology in medicine. There is application of nuclear energy in testing. There's application of nuclear energy in industry. There's application of nuclear applications in crop production. And also there is use of nuclear application in control of fly breeding, and also there's application of nuclear applications in the control of plastic menace in our country. So these are other factors. And also nuclear applications can also be used for hydrogen production. Nuclear applications can also be used for desalination of salty water. And we are looking forward to this because when you look at the coastal region and the water supply, less than 30% of the people of the coastal region have access to clean water. Now, they have a big mass of salty water within that region. Desalination plant powered by the nuclear power can actually desalinate adequate and sufficient seawater into fresh water, which can be used for purposes of consumption and also for industrial application. So those are some of the things we are looking at in terms of other opportunities that are available within the nuclear industry. In terms of challenges, financing is always the first challenge in terms, because it is capital intensive in terms of capex. So that one gives a challenge to many embarking countries or developing countries to be able to raise the initial investment for nuclear power project. But after you are able to make this arrangement, because you require to develop a number of infrastructures, and then after that, then you must get the capex for the development of the real nuclear power project. So financing is one challenge. The other one is on the public acceptance. This one I can tell you, never in my backyard. Even if you went to the US, which has had nuclear for the last 80 years, if you try to introduce nuclear power plant in the US today, it will receive 5 times more opposition as it were to happen in Kenya. They say, not in my backyard. I want the power. Yes, because it is cheap power, it is carbon-free power, but not in my backyard. Take it elsewhere, then transfer the nuclear energy to me, and I can enjoy the benefits. So it is something that requires a lot of participation, a lot of engagement, right from the young people, all the way to the policymakers, so that the gains can be communicated, the challenges can be communicated, and also the mitigation measures of these fears that comes around the nuclear power program in regards to safety, safeguard and security can be assured, so that we make progress in terms of the deployment of the nuclear energy. Of course, infrastructure, good road system, transmission lines, waste management, storage facilities, they require significant time and resources and technical expertise. As you have seen, we have trained 66, and to train one nuclear engineer, 10 million Kenyan shillings. So that means, again, it is not a cheap venture. It requires resources. These resources should be availed for us to be able to make progress in the numbers that we are looking forward to improve the life of the people, the Kenyan people, and quality of life of the Kenyan people in the long term. So basically, those are 3 major challenges. Allow me to delve into the financing options that are available for nuclear power project across the globe, and what we are also looking at for the Kenyan case on what would be appropriate for us to finance this project. The first one is on public financing. Basically, this one involves government providing direct subsidies, letters of guarantees to cover the high upfront costs, and of course, the long-term risk associated with the nuclear power program. This has been applied in some countries like China, Egypt, and also Bulgaria, where government provides subsidies and also letters of guarantees to cover the high upfront cost. The other one is on the corporate financing. This is where now corporate bodies of corporate firms provide equity position and they invest in the nuclear power project. And we have seen such cases in Finland, Olkiluoto project, and also in the UK, Hinkley Point C, where corporate institutions came and invested in the nuclear power project. The other one is PPP, public-private partnerships, where government partner with private institutions to finance and to actually design, finance, operate, and transfer nuclear power projects. And this one, we have also seen it in countries like Turkey, Akuyu nuclear power plant, where the government partnered with private institutions to build that nuclear power project in Turkey. The other one is project financing, where it involves raising funds from various sources such as banks and other institutional investors to finance specific projects. This has happened in other conventional energy projects like geothermal, thermal power plants that can also be applied on nuclear energy. The other one, members, is on the infrastructure funds. Infrastructure fund can be gotten both domestically and also internationally, where we have seen increasing investing in nuclear power projects, where countries through the departments like the US, we have the Department of Energy sponsoring Generation 3+ nuclear power plants in many countries for deployment. So they provide this infrastructure fund for purposes of deployment of the nuclear power program. There are some other emerging financing techniques like the green bonds and sustainable financing. And nuclear being considered as a clean source of energy falls within this bracket, where you benefit from the green bonds because you contribute towards a low carbon emission. And this is seriously happening in Europe, where countries that have sustained efforts in utilization of renewable energy. And for Kenyan case, as you're aware, we are almost 85% clean energy when we dispatch our energy every single day. And this has been necessitated by geothermal, which is available about 7,000 in potential, wind, solar, and now when we bring on board nuclear energy by the year 2034, then we shall continue, or we can benefit from these green bonds, where you are financed to develop those clean sources of energy, where nuclear is one of them. The other one, member, is multilateral development banks. And we have seen initially World Bank was very hesitant to finance nuclear power projects. But we have seen a lot of efforts towards them now softening their hearts in regards to nuclear power programs. And also we have the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, which provide loans and guarantees to support the development of nuclear power project. And this has happened in Argentina and also other Latin American countries. South Korea has Exim Bank. These are export credit agencies that provide funds and insurance to support their countries when they deploy the nuclear power program. And we saw this in UAE, where they have deployed 4 nuclear power programs in UAE, and South Korea was a vendor country. So South Korea and China have this facility in terms of export credit. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude and say that if you see countries like UAE, where we have a lot of deposits in terms of oil, making a deliberate effort to go nuclear, then it begs a lot of questions. What is in this nuclear energy? And I can for sure say with certainty that for any country to develop and see meaningful development, it can only happen in the environment of nuclear energy, because you'll be assured of stability, you will be assured of reliability and affordability in terms of levelized cost of energy coming from nuclear power would provide affordability to the common mwananchi to benefit from that endeavor. In Africa, there's a race we call the nuclear race. Following the milestone approach that I talked about, the IEA milestone approach that has phases 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 is where a country is making a knowledgeable decision. You have evaluated your network and you have said, as a country, we are going nuclear, and you have made that decision. And then you move to phase 2, where you are making preparatory works to start construction. So there are certain things you need to undertake before you start construction. And these are site evaluation, bid preparation, and all that before you get the bid. And then phase 3 is now when you start the construction and eventually commission and start to operate the nuclear power program. Now in Africa, it's only South Africa that has reached phase 3 because they're already operating a nuclear power program. Then in phase 3, we have Egypt, which are now constructing their first nuclear power program. Then the other members who are in phase 2 is Kenya and Ghana. Ghana is ahead of Kenya in phase 2, ahead of Kenya by some inches. And Kenya is following Ghana, and then Nigeria is following Kenya. And then we have in phase 1 countries like our neighbors here in Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Rwanda following suit in terms of feasibilities and feasibility for the development of the nuclear power program. So this is an aspect that is going to take us, make us achieve our mandates and our flagship projects sooner rather than later. And we envisage that with the kind of safeguards and securities and safety aspects that are put in a nuclear power program, it will never allow for any shortcuts to be undertaken by any embarking country, because this vendor are only 7 in the world. The vendor countries that can provide this technology are 7. And for them to deploy their technology in any country, that country must demonstrate that all the 19 infrastructure issues have been ticked, yes, and they have evaluated and come to terms that that is possible. So in the nuclear world, there is no shortcut. You cannot make it anywhere. And an accident happening in Kenya here is an accident happening everywhere. It takes the attention of every country that has a nuclear power program to check what requires to be done in terms of those aspects of the nuclear power program. So Kenya is steadily on the positive progression towards the deployment of the nuclear power program. And we envisage that this, once done in 2034, will bring those benefits to fruition. And the Kenya will have serious development in terms of industries now coming to establish base in Kenya here and providing the requisite employment that are critical for the development of the Kenyan people. We look at even promoting medical tourism. When you have a research reactor in Kenya here and we are able to generate these radioisotopes that are used for cancer treatment, then we will be receiving members from countries now coming over to Kenya for purposes of treatment. Instead of going to India and provide that foreign exchange to other foreign countries, we foresee that providing benefit to our Kenyan people in that particular regard. So I think some of the issues that have been raised, I think I will be able to answer them during the Q&A section, but I want to stop there in regards to the status of the nuclear power program, some of the benefits, some of the challenges, and of course the financing aspects of the nuclear power program. And I would be willing to take any questions from the floor. Over to you, Winnie.
Out of your presentation, it is very clear and very evident that it is time that we actually embraced nuclear energy and incorporated it and integrated it into our energy mix as a country. Of course, with every project, it does not come without its share of challenges and of presenting opportunities for development as well. And it is very interesting just listening to you, the opportunities that embracing and integrating nuclear energy into our energy mix presents to us as a country, relating to our medical sector, the healthcare and medical advancements that nuclear energy integration comes with. Of course, the growth within our industries, which will have a ripple effect on our manufacturing capacity. And then, of course, we have an effect on our crop production. And the most interesting one is the sesefly breeding control, which affects most of those countries where you're doing the site evaluation. So that's a very good thing to just hear and be in a position now we can have a conversation on the ripple effect of adopting nuclear energy. I know it is also very evident from your conversation that there is a clear need for a clear transition strategy, just so that we are ensuring the continuity of nuclear energy planning as a country. And then so as to avoid disruptions to this very big ambition we are having as Kenya in adopting nuclear energy. The one thing I would also want to, as you will be coming into now, respond to our questions, there's clarity on the policy direction that we should be taking. And NUPEA definitely has put into thought the possibility or the way to ensure that there is sustained investment in ensuring we actually get to a place where we are saying we are nuclear energy efficient. And I can also hear from your presentation, there has been a challenge with stakeholder engagement, but you guys are in a place where you're trying to ensure that you're having continuous stakeholder engagement so that we are not having people fighting this idea. But the fighting, of course, and the pushback we are getting from communities is largely because of a lack of understanding of what the impact this will be to us as a country and to them as a community. So we appreciate the fact that you guys are working towards ensuring continuous stakeholder engagement. One thing I'd like you to clarify as we continue with this conversation, it's very evident that the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority has to work hand in hand with NUPEA. So the Nuclear Regulatory Authority remains on the safety side, and then NUPEA comes in with the technicality and the policy coordination. So just so that we are ensuring that as a country, as we adopt nuclear energy, we are, and as we try to ensure compliance with the International Atomic Energy Agency standards, where does that leave us with this dissolution? This dissolution issue is not coming out very clearly. We don't want to push you to the corner to respond to it, but it would be very important for us to understand. With the dissolution that was passed by Parliament, the conversation is clearly going on, maybe hashed, but it's something that we need to have a conversation on. Where does that leave our progress? Because you are telling us that we are making some very good progress with the adoption, but with this dissolution, where does that leave us? And then another thing I would like to understand as I cut this short now is you have told us that NUPEA has developed nuclear expertise over the years, and you're speaking of about 66 experts within the nuclear energy space. So with the dissolution, where does this leave these experts? Because we also do not want to find ourselves where we have spent 10 million as a country to train an individual, and then because of this dissolution, we are losing this expertise to people who would also want to delve into this space. So I'm sure we all have better clarity on nuclear energy, its integration, the progress we have made as a country, but those are pointers that would also just put us in a space where we are having a very objective conversation. So as we have, as engineer prepares to have a response to that, we have a few questions, engineer, on the chat box. We are moving to our Q&A session, where now you have an opportunity to raise questions and give comments, if any. So my colleague Steve Jairo is asking, nuclear energy is non-renewable. He stands guided. With the push towards embracing renewable energy sources across the globe, why should Kenya still follow this path? And then Anthony then also has a question. Why should Kenya think about nuclear when we have a lot of untapped renewable energy such as geothermal? And then again, Steve comes back and is saying, Kenya had an MOU with China, which has realized 7 trainees, with a need for about 1,000 personnel and Konza yet to take root in 2026. what is currently being done to ensure these numbers go up to meet the needed manpower. So as we prepare to have other people raise their hands and ask their questions, we could give engineer an opportunity to respond to those questions so far. So engineer, kindly, if you could just respond to those questions and also respond to the comments that we have shared. Karibu.
Thank you so much, Winnie. And let me start with your questions. I wouldn't want to delve so much on dissolution because it's an executive decision that was discussed in Parliament. I just want to say that when I was giving our evolution from 2010 to date, you realize in 2010, we existed within the Ministry of Energy as a committee, then went to become a board through an executive order in 2012, and then became an agency in 2019. Now, the nuclear power program is intact amidst all this discussion. The government of Kenya is saying the functions of NUPEA will be performed within the Ministry of Energy. So that means that there is no effect whatsoever in regards to the status of the nuclear power program. If anything, we foresee this one to even accelerate it further in this endeavor. In a nuclear, any embarking country must establish 4 critical organizations. The first one that comes normally on board is the NEPIO, which is NUPEA, and this happened in 2010, 2011. This NEPIO is then supposed to establish the requisite policies, guidelines, strategies for development of the nuclear power program, including giving birth to the requisite institutions. In 2019, we gave birth to the regulator through the enactment of the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Act, which gave birth to the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. The next and very important organization that is supposed to be formed is the owner-operator. This is the institution that is responsible for the construction, operations, and maintenance of the nuclear power project. So when you talk about constructing and even commissioning the first nuclear power project, it is supposed to be done by the owner-operator. And the strategies are in advanced stage, and the government of Kenya is soon going to designate an owner-operator that will be responsible for the next phase of the nuclear power program, which is phase 2 into phase 3 when it starts the construction and eventual operation. The other very critical organization that is supposed to be established, we call it TSO, Technical Service Organizations. And these are very competent organizations that provide technical assistance to these 3 institutions. So NEPIO, which is NUPEA, is supposed to be a policy direction, a policy organization, a policy department, a policy saga that provides general information and coordinating all nuclear aspects within the country, including the non-electric application, as I was talking about, those ones in agriculture, those ones in the industry, and also in the testing area and the medical arena. So the coordination still remains as a function of NUPEA amidst reducing functions. As you see, once you give birth to a regulator, some of the staff within the NEPIO cross over to the regulator. Once you give birth to the owner-operator again, some of the staff cross over to the owner-operator and they start their work in that particular regard. So there is no effect whatsoever with either decision that has come. If anything, it is about efficiency improvement. So the nuclear power program in the country, in fact, I'm seeing that it will get more impetus in terms of direction into formation of the requisite institutions that will drive this particular agenda item. And in that particular regard, I also wanted to say that these 66 people that have been trained, they are not in Upea alone. In Upea, we only have 20. That means 46 are in other institutions. As I said, we are training for the country. So these experts are within the regulator. Some of them are in Kenya Power. Some of them are in KETRACO, EPRA, GDC. They are ready and waiting and willing to start working in Kenya nuclear power program once the construction begins. So they are involved, they are engaged in the technical working groups that are organized by NUPEA across the 19 infrastructure issues. So these experts are thoroughly engaged. They are on the spinning mode, ready to take off in the year 2034 when the opportunity comes. And this is a strategic decision. As you can see, we were going for people who are already placed in institutions within the energy sector, training them and continuing to engage them, but they are on spinning mode. That means they are available when they are called upon by the year 2034. I also wanted to say that South Korea, we have an MOU with South Korea to train our Kenyan people. And this started in the year 2012, 2-year master's program in this. And they have been able to train our people in South Korea. So they train 7 every year, and they continue to do this until we get the requisite numbers. We also have MOU with Texas A&M in the US, again, training our people on nuclear energy. And of course, as I said, China, we started China last year, their first cohort group for China. The 7 of them went next last year, and we oversee that this is going to also improve our numbers. Of course, locally here within the Nairobi University, we have the Department of the Institute of Nuclear Science, where NUPEA sponsors master's students to train on nuclear science. So numbers is not a problem to us because we have actually developed our human resource strategy, projected it over 20 years, the numbers that we require for physicists, chemists, engineers, various types of engineers, lawyers, economists, financial analysts, and where they're going to come from and when they are required. And that has already been developed. And that's why you are seeing even the deployment of KAIST, which is the Kenyan Institute of Advanced Technology at Konza City, is as a result of our suggestion and policy direction that we gave, that we required Kenyan local university that will be able to churn out graduates in preparation for the deployment of the nuclear power plant. As I've said, next year is going to be the first year for their admission. And then it takes 4 years to train them. So that means by the year 2030, we shall have the first cohort group coming away out of KAIST. Our commissioning date is 2034. So these numbers are going to be in place by the year 2034, both locally, internationally, in that particular regard. So in terms of capacity, where they have been trained, they are available across the energy sector, ready to take the responsibilities of regulation, responsibilities of construction, responsibilities of operations and maintenance, and also in terms of policy direction in whatever regard. Now, there was a question in regards to why, and that came from Anthony, why should Kenya think about nuclear when we have a lot of untapped renewable energy, e.g. geothermal? We say in energy planning that if you don't plan for energy, you fail the generation to come. The energy that you are enjoying today, the aspect that you are able to switch on your lights in your house is as a result of somebody who planned for you 20 years ago. And that's why we say we use the least cost power development plan, which is a 20-year least cost power development plan. And this one looks at, first of all, the demand. You project the demand of the country, the domestic, the commercial, the industry, and project it over 20 years and see how your demand is going to grow. And then once you have projected that demand, like the current least cost power development plan is 24-year 2043. That's the 20-year development plan that shows that our demand is going to grow up to 10,000 megawatt by the year 2043. how are you going to meet this demand? Then you look at the source. From the source side, do you have energy to meet this demand? What are the sources that are available within the country to meet this demand? And Kenya considers all those sources, Mr. Anthony, all the sources that we have, all the geothermal that we have, all the hydros that we have, all the wind that we have, all the solar, all the cogen, including thermal energy, and then put them in what we call the energy mix, and then run simulations to provide the least cost power from all this. Now, in Kenya, we have a potential of 7,000 megawatts coming from geothermal. Beyond that, we have nothing from geothermal. In fact, initially it was 10,000 as a potential. As we continue to explore geothermal within the Olkaria and Baringo, at times we hit dry wells. So that's how it has even reduced from 10,000 to actual that can be seen now to 7,000 megawatt coming from geothermal. We have developed about 1,200. We have some 6,000 to develop from geothermal. We are planning for our future generations. What happens after the exhausting of the 6,000 megawatt? Would you want Kenyan to be plunged into a blackout? Because we have exploited all the 6,000 that Kenya can have in terms of geothermal. How much do we have in terms of solar? 3,000 megawatts, that is our potential. Wind, 6,000 megawatts, that is our potential. We have studied all this and put them together in energy mix and prorated them over 20 years and seen how do we bring all these sources of energy together. So no energy source has been untapped. In fact, if you look at our energy mix today, we have 300 megawatts coming from wind. The East and Central African biggest wind farm is Lake Turkana wind farm. So that shows you that Kenya is committed to bringing all sources of energy there. So wind is available, 300 megawatts. We have solar, Garissa solar plant, 50 megawatts. We have Alten Casas in Eldoret, another 120 megawatts. We have Malindi solar, another 40 megawatts. If you add all this, that shows you that we are actually utilizing all available natural resources that can give us renewable energy into the mix. But there's something we call intermittency. What happens when you have a cloud cover and you as a patient, you are undergoing an operation in an hospital, and then there's a cloud cover? That means there's no power coming from solar. Or at that particular time, you are being operated on and you're using wind power. And then the turbine, there's no wind because you cannot judge when the wind comes. And then it moves from 300 megawatts to zero. Would you want as a patient to suffer the consequences of lack of power because of that intermittency coming from the solar or wind energy, which we know they are intermittent? So this invariability of renewable energy is complemented by a stable source of energy. And the stable source of energy in this case is geothermal, nuclear energy, and hydro. But hydro again has the disadvantages of it is weather dependent. You remember in 1997, we suffered the greatest hydrological issues in this country that led us into even load shedding up to 2000. And that one brought in very expensive emergency plans in this country. So hydro again does not answer your question 100% because in the event of low hydrology, then you have a problem with your grid. So all these sources of energy are an optimum country that plans for energy, looks at all sources of energy and how they're going to contribute towards your security, how it's going to contribute towards your climate change mitigation, and then you bring them all together and you're able to dispatch all of them. So all renewable sources of energy in this country have been considered, all their potentials have been considered, and you can imagine we are moving up to 2100 years when we shall have exhausted all sources of geothermal, all sources of wind and solar, but you will not be there to explain to your generation that we failed to plan for you Now there's no geothermal, now there's no solar, and therefore we cannot be able to supply you. Our generations, the alphas and the betas, will hold us to account if you can't plan for it. So all these sources of energy are complementary. They are working together. So if solar, there's a cloud cover, nuclear energy is available to tap up and close up that particular problem. When the wind turbine stops to blow, nuclear or geothermal or hydro will be available. We call them, they are in spinning mode, just to be able to ensure that the operation in the hospital continues uninterrupted. I think these are some of the things that people don't know. When you receive power in your home, you don't know what goes on within the control center. There is a lot of planning and balancing act. When you lose solar, you have to bring on board very fast hydro, or you bring on very fast geothermal, so that the patient, wherever they are, they don't suffer. Was there any other question that I didn't answer, Kirimi?
Thank you, engineer. So we skipped 2 questions from my colleague and from Elias. We apologize for that. So Elias asked, yeah, in terms of milestones, where are we as a country? And then Jairus, my colleague, what is the projected cost of establishing this one plant in Kenya? And considering the timelines, which financing option is more likely for our case? And then we have a final question from Fiona. I hope I got that right, Kirimi. So she says, hi, so far it has been an insightful webinar, thank you. And then some questions, which type of reactors will be commissioned? Also, what are the plans made to supply nuclear fuel and also handle nuclear waste? Of course, it's just about the waste management. And then are there deep geological sites laid out to immobilize them? So engineer, we will request that you respond to those 3 questions. In the meantime, is there anybody who would want to voice a question or give a comment? Because as engineer is responding to these questions, he will be also giving his closing remarks. And with the closing remarks, I will be handing over to my colleague Jairus, who will also be adjourning the meeting and giving us the next steps going forward. So anybody who would want to voice their question, at least it would be nice to hear a voice. Please go ahead to respond to the 3 questions and then also give us your closing remarks before I hand over to my colleague Jairus. Engineer Karibu.
Thank you so much, Winnie. Kenya is in phase 2. That means we are in the preparatory phase in preparation for the construction of the nuclear power plant. We moved from phase 1 in 2015. We invited International Atomic Energy Agency. They came over, evaluated our processes, evaluated our infrastructure issues, and they gave us 15 recommendations, 8 suggestions, and 4 best practices. Then we spent 4 years, actually 5 years, from 2015 to 2021, closing those gaps on the 15 recommendations. Then we invited them back in 2021 June to come and check whether we had closed on those requirements. When they came back in 2021, they were able to evaluate us and found out that we had actually met all the 15 recommendations in that particular regard. And therefore, we then, the International Atomic Energy Agency, published us as having met the criteria to move from phase 1 to phase 2. So we are steadily in phase number 2. The other one is on the cost of the nuclear power. And this one, I want to answer it in terms of the cost per megawatt. $3 million per megawatt. That is the cost of the nuclear power. In terms of the financing option, I think that the government will be able to make that particular decision. We have evaluated various options that I've already presented here in terms of build, own, operate, transfer, in terms of the PPP arrangements. Some vendors, they want to come and provide you with the resources. So those available are for the government because they have already been evaluated. The government will be able to make an informed decisions on the best financing option in that particular regard. In terms of the reactor type, we are going for something that is called the pressurized water reactor, and it must be a generation 3+. That means the most modern reactor technology that we have. As you know, our grid is pretty small, but I can assure you what is happening in Kenya over the last 1 year is amazing. That the peak demand is growing at a rate that is unprecedented. In fact, if you are careful, last week we recorded another peak load, 2,317 megawatt. In January, we had 2,306. So in a period of 1 month, we have 17 megawatts being added into the grid. That means there is some consumption increase that is moving in this regard. And this one gives us even hope that the nuclear power program should be fast-tracked so that we are able to continue to provide reliability. So we'll be looking at both large nuclear reactor and also small modular reactor. And all these must be the type we call the pressurized water reactor, whose safety features are top-notch. In terms of rad waste management, as I said, it's one of the 19 infrastructure issues. We have developed strategies for rad waste management because it's a long-term project. This one will come after the nuclear power project has been commissioned. You know, you use uranium for purposes of generating power from a nuclear power program. Once it has been decayed for some 2 years, you now replace that, and that's what we call the spent fuel. That spent fuel is managed within the nuclear power plant in a place we call the spent fuel pool. So within the nuclear power containment building, there's a pool there that we put that spent fuel for further decay. That means further reduction in reactivity and toxicity. So after some time, the levels of decay has gone low. It can then be moved from that pool and we put them in what we call the dry casts, again within the nuclear power plant. So there again, we require that they undergo further decay from 0.7 levels to about 0.002 levels. That means now they are almost non-reactive. And then from there, they are expected to be taken to a permanent repository. So in our strategy for rad waste management, we have defined all that, how we are going to move the spent fuel from the reactor to the dry cast and eventually to the permanent repository, which is a geological repository. And also the design of that will be provided for when we eventually undertake the design of a nuclear power program. I also want to bring to your attention, yes, there is deep geological arrangement that is happening within Africa. There's a company from the US and Canada called DeepGeo that is considering economies of scale for all African countries that are considering to have nuclear power program. So that instead of each country building their own geological repository for spent fuel, then countries, Ghana has been selected and Somaliland have been selected as countries that will be used to construct the deep geological repository for countries in Africa for purposes of storing permanently the spent fuel. So for us, we see that as a good multilateral arrangement between countries where you put your resources together and you manage your resources in that particular regard. What we call spent fuel is not waste. For us, we see it as a resource because once this fuel has been utilized, you can reprocess it back and use it for fuel to generate further energy. So it forms that closed loop in terms of nuclear fuel cycle. So for our country, we are looking at both open loop and closed loop nuclear fuel cycle from mining all the way to reprocessing. But in terms of uranium use, it is very abundant in countries. It is projected that even if countries were to operate for 1,000 years, the resources that have been explored right now in terms of uranium is available to undertake countries for 1,500 years. That means this resource is available in abundance. And that's why it's sometimes called renewable, because you don't exhaust this resource it goes, you reprocess it back, and you use it back for purposes of generating further energy. So I think that would be the final take in terms of question. But I want to say that as a country, we want to change our livelihood. We want to improve our quality of life. The answer is in nuclear energy. But we need to make everybody understand, the stakeholders that are involved in this industry. This is a very big and complex venture for any country, and it requires a dedication. It requires information. It requires education of the Kenyan population for purposes of accepting acceptance levels to go high, so that we can then make the progress a reality. So even the audience that I'm talking to today, it's critical that the information that you get can also be utilized for purposes of disseminating the same to the Kenyan population for purposes of just getting some awareness enhancement. Thank you so much for listening to me. We are always available for any kind of clarifications on matters nuclear, so that as a team and as a Kenyan people, we can make progress. Thank you so much, and over to you, Winnie.
I have no doubt that everyone will agree this was a very insightful conversation, even as Elias has said. And I take this opportunity to thank Engineer Ohaga for honoring our invitation and sharing these insightful things on nuclear power, nuclear energy. I'm still confusing between power and energy, and I know they are different. And you've taken us through the status where we are as a country, and our target to commission our first nuclear plant in 2034. You've taken us through the challenges that exist on the way and the opportunities that are still there, and on the financing options. And I think as we carry on these conversations, we'll be able to understand further on which are more cost-effective financing options that exist. Once again, thank you very much, Engineer. I really liked the examples you used on these marriages that will last 80 to 100 years, and who would want that? I think all of us would want such. And I really liked that part where you said 2 years of no disruptions, like 2 years of a honeymoon that doesn't have any issues. I think most of us, after listening to you, would vote for this idea of nuclear energy in the country. What I'm not sure is if we want that in our backyards. But yes, this is a nice idea. For everyone who attended this webinar, we appreciate you for taking your time to be part of this conversation, and we hope that your questions and your questions were answered, and I hope you'll find again time to participate in our further engagements. Next week we have another webinar on one of the issues that was touched on, the reforms of some of the sagas, and I hope as a continuation of or the background that has been laid today, we'll find that conversation also important. To everyone at IEA who contributed to make this webinar a success, we really appreciate you, and special mention goes to our communications and IT teams. Lastly, I want to remind all of us that IEA is a membership organization, and to find more information on that, please reach out to our communication teams. And that's all from us. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Keep the conversation going. And then maybe if I not forget this is not where we are going to end this conversation. I know we'll be getting back to Engineer so that this webinar is just not the last output. We need to have more conversation on this, and therefore keep checking our websites for more outputs from this engagement. Thank you.